Culture Interrupted, produced by Cognitive Rise Productions. What is culture? How we observe and celebrate, how we care makes us a people upholding traditions built from our morals and experiences and values that we all have in common. Culture is how we share in the experience of life. Culture is how we celebrate life. What is happening in the cannabis industry? What are the changes and effects being felt? With regulation upon us, it is imperative that innovators remain compelling in action towards the ultimate goal, which is moving into a realm of highest quality standards and guidelines focused on wellness, harmony, education. Culture Interrupted is honored to present Rich Moskowitz.
Mine has been a long and winding road, but I'm an advocate, an activist, an educator, a business owner, and a lifelong ally of the cannabis plant. Culture is everything. I've said all my life that you can always run and choose your path in life, your religion, your views, but you can never choose your culture. You never choose where you've come from. You can never deny that. So culture is at the essence of who we all are. And I certainly think back to really joyful times with friends in the woods, at concerts, experiences that shaped the futures of our lives. And then in a later part of my experience with cannabis, the joy of pain relief, the joy of being able to find something that, as someone who's never participated in the medical system their whole life, was able to alleviate pain, find rest and relaxation, recharge, not only my body, but my mind and my spirit. So I continue to find new joys every day, quite honestly. Oh gosh, the circle. It's awesome, right? It's something I never thought about as a youth, but it naturally congregated to, whether it was the ease of passing or even not, because when you're in a living room situation, square corners, people still circled up. You see everybody, you're open to everybody. You're taking part in a connection to the plant world that you may not even think that you're doing. There's so few plants that actually, at least in my experience, seem to have co-developed with human consciousness and humankind over thousands of years, and by the very nature of sharing this with somebody else, sitting with a circle, being entirely open to their energy, it would be hard-pressed for me to think of any other way to partake or share cannabis with anybody other than a circle. The large, overall, what I call the umbrella of the cannabis community encompasses everyone, and that's one of the things that makes it so important. It's really, if you look at it, it binds everyone together through every socioeconomic strata, through every kind of division in America, we find cannabis. So if nothing else, that is one thing that we all have in common with our brother, with our neighbor, with our sister, who we may share a little else in common with. So, I mean, it is the foundation, it is the starting point of being with one another, and therefore, it's of paramount importance that it continues.
You are listening to Culture Interrupted.
The plant, in a lot of ways, can teach us everything we need to know. If two parties disagree and they both happen to consume, well, sharing plant oftentimes allows an openness for them to hear each other. So following what I consider, what I like to paraphrase as the soul of the plant, that would be maybe another tenet of these core pillars maybe of the community. I consider advocacy and activism different. So advocacy is working in the way of the soul of the plant to assist people to have access to medicine that they are either prevented from having, financially, accessibility-wise, for other reasons. A friend of mine who was diagnosed with really aggressive breast cancer, she sent me a text, and I was at a music festival at the time, and I just happened to look at my phone, and most people die really quickly, and this is usually undiscovered, and she sent me a text thanking me because she just was cancer-free. Activism is different. Activism is being a New Yorker and going, really, I don't really like taking no for an answer. So if you pass these laws and then you don't do what you can do, we're Americans. We have a system to go and change that. So different ways that I've come to each of these paths, I think.
You are listening to Culture Interrupted.
I was never an advocate for Prop 64. I actually I've always been pro-cannabis my whole life. I've always had a deep connection on that. I've touched on that. When 64 came up, I discussed it greatly with my brother who lives in Washington, because his response when I asked him what he was going to do years prior, I didn't understand. And his response was, it's a terrible law, but I have no choice when presented with the opportunity to vote for cannabis than to vote for it. In retrospect, that isn't very much the way I looked at 64. As Prop 64 was coming forward, I was a big fan of a different model. Unfortunately, in the run-up, that model went away, and I was left with Prop 64. And again, as I say, I think my vote was not so much for 64, but for the rest of the world to understand the cannabis plant is and always has been in simpatico with humanity. People have been kept out of this industry in a lot of ways, even to the simplest way that for a lot of people in many states in the country, if you've ever been arrested for cannabis, you can't participate in this new industry. So a litmus test to who should be in it, no. However, we have to understand the power of the purse, right? So this is where the community comes in. So if someone deems, if we all choose together that someone is not expressing the soul, the plan, or proper cannabis community values, then we can't choose if they're in the business or not, but we can certainly vote with our dollars, vote with our mouths, and if we're polite, maybe even vote with our Facebook pages. However, that's where it is. So I'm very hesitant to be exclusionary in any way, and that's why I say that, because that's the problems that got us here. However, rewarding the players who go above and beyond, that's where it's at, and then spreading the word, at least amongst ourselves, if in any industry, if a corporation is not doing what we would hope that they would from the way they portray their corporation.
You are listening to Culture Interrupted.
The city of Oakland had an amazing opportunity. They're viewed really as the center of cannabis for so many rightful reasons. They led the way with Measure Z. They led the way with so many things. The equity program was a brilliant model, and I really think that they really need to focus on addressing the issues with the model, improving them, and then touting that as openly and as proudly as they tout the Warriors, or tout the A's. This is something that is really monumental example moving forward, both for business and for cannabis. We fought long and hard in the city of Alameda, in the groups that we created, to prioritize local ownership. And for me, that is the case with everything, and it's not just cannabis, because it's really simple. And I used to say to people, if you have a business in this town, then you're gonna raise your children, if that's your path, in this town. You're gonna be invested in their schooling, in their park, in their life experience and such. That doesn't mean that your business doesn't do business elsewhere. I'm just saying at the point of it, you're gonna be more vested here. So I really like local. I really think that's a solution for a lot of future development for America. I fought long and hard to find a legal way to prioritize local ownership, and it's a very problematic issue because you can't restrict commerce in many, many ways. This is yet another issue with the equity program that needs to be dealt with, and these kind of things shouldn't be dealt with after the fact. Somebody should have put this thought into these kind of things. In my own situation in Alameda, I know that we offered our electeds and our city officials every opportunity to speak to any person in this industry or go to any dispensary, to just not to try and influence them, but say the only way we think a good decision is made is when you have all the information you would ever desire about everything. So if we can do this, then you can make a proper decision on a big issue. Some of the finer points that I've seen of the equity program were never thought through. It was like, this sounds good, we should do this, this is gonna get some votes. And it didn't start from the heart, and it didn't start with the people. And I think that is problematic.
You are listening to Culture Interrupted.
The market's gonna change incredibly in the next 5 years, as it's really changed incredibly in the last 7 months from a consumer's point of view. So I think 5 years out, that's an incredible shot in the dark. But I can tell you maybe my educated guess as what I think is gonna happen in California anyway. So in California, I think we're gonna see several markets. So I think we're gonna see what I call, and I don't mean to cast aspersions on any corporation, but what I call the 7-Eleven market. I think that we're gonna see a convenient, large corporate, inexpensive market that is aimed at the casual consumer, the same person who might stop before a football game, go into somebody's house and pick up a 12-pack. And much like we have craft beer in California, and then we have many varieties of production beer, that will probably not be the highest quality product. It will be, like many products, built to a price point. Separately, Northern California in general is a craft economy, so we like our craft cheese, we like our craft coffee, we like our craft ice cream. I fully expect, and I would hope that the state regulations would support this cottage industry, I fully expect that the incredible skill set developed over the last 30 years here to manufacture incredible products, to grow flowers that lead the world. I fully expect that to be a craft market locally. And it might be a little pricier, as these things often are, but there will be a market for that. And so we have this large corporate market, we have this small craft market in 5 years, and honestly, there's one other market. And that market is California. Probably the only thing that was good, in my opinion, in Prop 64 was they provided the ability for every citizen in the state to grow 6 plants. So the third market I see, and I honestly hope, is the ability to people to grow their own. Not only can we grow our own in the state now, we're allowed to gift up to an ounce of flower and 8 grams of concentrates and such, and I'm not even sure off the top of my head, edibles. So the third market that'll be developing is this, what was once referred to maybe in my youth when I was really little, a back to the land movement, but it'll be back to the plant movement. And if I grow really great Granddaddy Purple, I don't want to smoke that strain all the time, so I'll often maybe connect with other people. Maybe what was sewing circles to share stitches 150 years ago might be growing circles to share plants and to share edibles and concentrates. So I see 3 markets, and personally, it's that third market that I think is really the soul of the plant.
You are listening to Culture Interrupted.
Words are powerful. Our reality is created by words. It's the only thing we really share ultimately that can be physically pointed to create reality. Let's call it the legacy market. From the people who have been creating cannabis and cannabis products for the 27 years I've been in this state, some of them have been doing it following the prescribed rules and regulations set down 20 years ago under the medical laws, and some of them have not. In the legacy market versus the regulated market, or the regulated versus unregulated market, it's one of the things our community is going to have to really take to heart. It hurt me. It hurt me deeply when one of the issues locally in this that we're talking about was there was talk, let's just say, that certain players on one side or the other snitched, ratted out, whatever terminology you want, other players. And that is a fundamental problem inherent to cannabis. We were an industry that we all came into being introduced to this industry or this lifestyle or this plant by somebody else because it was not readily available. You did not talk openly about this. And as such, that came with certain rules. And one of the rules is best not to keep this anywhere near the police in any facet because we all suffer. And I say that from my own experience, and my own experience in America is different than many other people's experience in America. And oftentimes bringing the police into other people's experience has much more dire consequences and violating a core cannabis value when even today this is federally illegal. Like, this is still problematic in America. I used to purchase quite a bit in the regulated market last year. I loved it. I loved getting samples. I loved seeing my friends at farmers markets. And I have not purchased anything in the regulated market. This was an economic issue in Alameda where we didn't have people interested in licenses. This is an issue, and if we leave it to regulated versus unregulated, and we don't think about this, again, soul of the plant. What does the plan tell us to do? The plan tells us to talk to everyone, get their point of view, and agree on core values, and then figure out a way to move forward. The alternative is that we're just going to have police cracking down on people, and that's something we all agree was horrific, traumatic, problematic, and decimated at least one generation of youth.
You are listening to Culture Interrupted.
I would love to see the remain of the cannabis culture I know and love. The subtle sense of humor, the subtle playfulness that I saw exhibited over the last 10 or 15 years in subtle ways before people were hip to it. Clocks being set to 4:20 on some random set on television on a silly sitcom that you see 20 years later going, that's really interesting. The sharing, the happiness, the really simple at the end of the day, having the space to be with another human being. That childlike playfulness in cannabis of seeing things just a little bit differently. What I'd like to see dissolve in some ways, and cannabis has the ability to do this, has been my experience, is I'd like to see us maybe get a little bit out of ourselves, and with the dissolving of self, one can say, being open to co-creating something new, right? So my ideas on what should be are different than your ideas on what should be, and everyone else's ideas on what should be, but there's no inherent value to my idea or your idea. Right? Like, that's the thing. So people are often tied up to the ego of my idea or your idea. And so I think in some way cannabis can lead to the dissolving of old paradigms, old antiquated laws, provide an opening to allow to see co-creation and moving forward differently. How many of us now are interacting with our parents and our parents' generation in a way that we never did before, where they're coming to us and asking us about cancer treatment or skin salves or any other way. Myself and my own mother, we joke and about like, you used to bust me for this, I used to hide from this. But the thing is, now I'm giving educational talks to senior clubs and her friends. So, as I say, I'd like to see old paradigms dissolve, old systems that didn't address the needs of today dissolve and be reformed. The reality is these standards in a regulated market are set by lawmakers, and the reality of that is lawmakers have a lot of voices and a lot of influences. Since the state has allowed me to grow plants, and I've had the opportunity to do that again, this plant connects in so many ways is my belief, and part of that is if you're disrespecting this plant, whether it's maybe coming at it with a profit motive only, or disrespecting it by hurting it with chemicals that have no part of nature ever, and disrespecting it by allowing that to go through to the ultimate consumer solely so you can make money, then it's my belief that the plant in some way will engineer much like the energy that controls the universe, that those are not long-term successful. But we have to honor and point to those who are doing it correctly, that is, And maybe in a unique position and have the luxury of always putting what I like to phrase as the soul of the plan as a primary decision factor and such, and as a leader in any decision. And yet, I also realize that I have a lot of luxury in that respect that others don't. When I made clothing out of hemp and organic cotton, made baby clothing, little overalls, like an Oshkosh B'gosh product, and I didn't have to struggle so much. My struggle back then was education about this and cannabis and why it was great and everything else. And because it was very unique in the world, the money issue didn't have to come into play. People understood that buying something unique and crafting and made in America was going to cost more. But I also have spent my business career educating people about why doing the exact opposite of what business school tells you is the instant pathway to success.
You are listening to Culture Interrupted.
My whole life, cannabis has been spiritual, recreational. And certainly, when I was young, I always had stomach pains, and being what used to be referred to as a young stoner, I just thought, I don't know, and I always said that if my stomach hurts, I'll get high, and I always said, I don't know if it's doing anything or just distracting me. But either way, my stomach doesn't hurt, so it's cool. So I always had this little medical connection and such with cannabis, and you're feeling lonely or down, there was always a way to go. 3 years ago, I've never interacted with the medical system whatsoever. I took advantage of new technology to address the one health issue, and it wasn't even a looks thing for me. It was that people always said, if you always carry infection in your body, it's going to be bad for your heart. This is a genetic thing to some degree. So I chose to use the new developing technology to replace all my teeth and voluntarily interact with a system that I think at its core is the exact opposite of what I believe about cannabis and its system. At its core, it's rooted in the profit motive and not in the health motive. But my brother had done this, I did due diligence. Reason was not to improve a look or to improve my mental version of myself in the mirror. The reason was, my whole life, because of these open wounds in my mouth, that I carried infection in my body. A couple of things came out of this that were really not knowing. I've always been a New Yorker. I've always been you did this to me. This is your fault. And I certainly had that, right? Like the levels, the stages of grief, right? Certainly anger and emotion and wanting to get even, wanting justice, wanting retribution, getting to a point of just wanting somebody to hear me. Even the state, who has this whole follow-up mechanism for settlements from medical people to make sure that even those medical people don't need to be checked, failed me, right? So leading me to really a desperate, desperate time. And when the last hope of repair, and now I live with daily pain and live with a bunch of other things that I don't need to go into, but at my lowest point, there was, quite honestly, just two things that saved me from basically doing the unthinkable. One was cannabis, for sure. That provided a little space for me to take a breath in some way, to realize, as horrible as everything was, not to use my life as anything but as an example, but that's one of the powers of cannabis. In the worst of worst moments for me, finding some space to have some other view.
You are listening to Culture Interrupted.
This plant has been kept away from us, whether intentionally or not, it doesn't really matter. The is what is, the was what was, and what's next is up to us. So you ask about that. I chose to share a little of my story because, not to say my life's been hard. In fact, my life is so much easier than so many people I know. But there's been some benefits here. That's one benefit. The benefit of my journey, it's been really unexpected and amazing, is that standing in service for others totally takes me out of my situation. Totally takes me out of my pain awareness. Cannabis is, in many formats, is the catalyst for that change and for that growth for so many people.
We appreciate you making the time to listen to Culture Interrupted.